It began like any other Monday in paradise. The sun rose over the central Philippines on November 3, 2025, spilling gold across the Pacific. Fishermen steered their boats into glassy water. Vendors opened stalls. Children chased waves barefoot along the sand, laughing as the tide rolled in. The air was warm, around 84 degrees, and the world felt steady, peaceful. But far beyond the horizon, that same ocean was stirring. A swirl of clouds had begun to twist and grow, feeding on the heat below. From the top floor of the Pagasa Weather Center in Manila, meteorologists watched the satellite images in silence. Each frame showed the storm tightening, darker, stronger, faster. Wind speeds were climbing. Pressure was falling. The pattern was unmistakable. By mid-morning, it had a name, Typhoon Tino, internationally known as Kalmaegi. Moving west at 15 miles per hour, it was headed straight toward eastern Samar, a place still haunted by the memory of Super Typhoon Haiyan, 12 years earlier. Evacuation alerts sounded across radio stations. Signal number 2. Now upgraded to signal number 4, the announcer set his voice shaking. Fishermen scrambled to dock their boats. Families packed what little they could: flashlights, water jugs, rosaries. The sky began to change. The light dimmed. The wind thickened. A quiet unease spread through the villages, a kind of silence that always comes before something terrible. By sunset, waves were crashing against the seawall, and thunder rolled in from the horizon like the sound of distant artillery. Then, as night fell, the first heavy drops began to fall slow at first, then furious. And across the coast, as power flickered and prayers filled the air, the islands braced for what was coming. Because this wasn't just another storm. It was the kind of storm you remember for the rest of your life. The kind that erases the line between sky and sea and reminds the world that paradise can turn into chaos in a single night. As dusk settled over the Pacific, the storm that had once been a distant swirl on radar began to evolve into something far more menacing. At 8:00 p.m., meteorologists at Pagasa confirmed it. Typhoon Tino had reached full intensity. Sustained winds roared at 85 miles per hour, with gusts surging beyond 105 kph. The pressure dropped rapidly, a classic sign of explosive intensification. Warm sea surface temperatures near 84 degrees and almost zero vertical wind shear created the perfect fuel for Tino's rapid growth. In satellite images, the storm's eye sharpened, glowing white against the dark ocean below. It was now a Category 4 equivalent typhoon, a living machine of heat, wind, and moisture. Rain bands spiraled hundreds of miles outward, dumping 2 to 4 inches of rain per hour across the Visayas and northern Mindanao, flooding villages even before the storm arrived. In coastal towns like Guan and eastern Samar, loudspeakers echoed through the night: "Evacuate immediately. Bring only essentials. Stay indoors and away from windows." Families packed hurriedly plastic tubs filled with rice flashlights and children's clothes. Fishermen lashed their boats to mangrove roots, whispering prayers into the wind. Dogs barked at the growing roar from the sea. By midnight, the horizon had disappeared into a wall of gray. The ocean boiled, the wind screamed, and lightning flashed in blinding streaks. The storm wasn't coming anymore, it was already here. And the Philippines once again was standing face to face with nature's fury. Just after 3:00 a.m., under a pitch-black sky typhoon, Tino made landfall near Del Carmen, Surigao del Norte. Winds exceeding 110 miles per hour tore across the coastline like a freight train, snapping coconut palms in half and hurling metal roofs into the air like paper. Residents described a deafening roar, a sound that drowned out prayer shouting, even thought itself. In Samar and Leyte, waves as high as 10 feet slammed against seawalls, flooding streets that had been silent hours earlier. Entire villages vanished underwater within minutes. Power transformers exploded in flashes of blue light, illuminating the chaos for just a moment before plunging everything back into darkness. In Tacloban City, people who still remembered Super Typhoon Haiyan felt a familiar terror return. Storm surges rushed inland, carrying boats onto highways and pushing debris through the downtown district. Families crowded into churches and schools that creaked under the strain of the wind. When the windows shattered, they covered their children with blankets and sang hymns to drown out the noise. By dawn, Tino's core had carved a 250-mile-wide path of destruction across the Visayas. Communication lines were down, power grids silent, and emergency radios crackled with fragmented voices pleading for help. The Philippines had survived another night of unimaginable violence from the sea, and the scale of what awaited at sunrise was beyond anything they could yet imagine.
Grabe, oh. Wala na. Wala na.
When morning finally broke over the Visayas, the landscape looked unrecognizable, as if the storm had rewritten the map overnight. In southern Leyte, entire neighborhoods lay flattened, their rooftops scattered across muddy fields. Concrete walls had caved in. Power lines twisted like vines along highways. The only sounds left were the hum of generators, the wailing of sirens, and the soft rhythmic drip of rain from roofs that no longer existed. In Ormoc City, residents emerged from shelters to find streets buried under fallen trees and corrugated metal. "Everything's gone," whispered one mother, clutching her child as she looked at where her home used to stand. Emergency crews from the armed forces of the Philippines and local fire brigades began moving before sunrise, wading through waist-deep floodwater to reach trapped families. Helicopters thundered overhead, airlifting the injured from rooftops where they'd spent the night, clinging to satellite dishes and water tanks. Along Cebu's southern coast, rescuers used rubber boats to reach neighborhoods swallowed by storm surge. In Karkar and Sibanga, floodwaters filled entire blocks. Residents waved flashlights from their attics, praying to be seen before the tide rose again. The Department of Social Welfare and Development distributed 200,000 emergency food packs, while military trucks carried water and blankets to gymnasiums turned into shelters. But the needs were overwhelming. With 150,000 people displaced and many towns still unreachable, aid workers described the situation as organized chaos. Downed bridges and landslides had cut off entire districts of eastern Samar, forcing rescuers to hike through mud with ropes and flashlights. And still the rain kept falling, not as a downpour, but as a relentless, exhausting drizzle that made survival feel like a battle against time itself.
Natuma na sa balay, guys. Never na mo rin.
By the second day, the true scale of Typhoon Tino's devastation began to emerge, and it was staggering. Across Leyte and Samar, whole towns looked as if they had been bombed. Satellite images showed miles of coastline erased, replaced by brown floodplains and tangled debris. Roads that once linked thriving communities were gone, buried beneath mud, uprooted trees, and shattered concrete. The Maharlika Highway, a vital lifeline connecting the Visayas, was severed in multiple locations, halting aid convoys and cutting off access to the worst-hit villages. Bridges that stood for decades had simply vanished, washed away by flash floods. In southern Leyte, 80% of homes were damaged or destroyed. Roofs lay twisted in rice fields, and concrete homes that had survived previous storms finally gave way under Tino's relentless force. Infrastructure across the region was in ruins. The National Grid Corporation confirmed that 5 major transmission towers were down, plunging hundreds of thousands into darkness. In Cebu City, high-rise buildings lost windows and signage. Glass littered the streets like ice. Airports closed, flights were grounded, and more than 60 domestic routes were canceled. Ferry terminals turned into evacuation zones where stranded passengers huddled under tarps for shelter. Even the sea was no longer safe. Waves as high as 10 feet 3 meters struck Ormoc Karkar and Tagbilaran, flooding ports and pushing fishing boats inland. In Bohol, warehouses were submerged. In Samar storm, surge invaded town centers. And yet, amid the chaos, what struck rescuers most was the silence. No cell service, no electricity, no contact with dozens of towns. In the absence of communication, fear filled the gap. Reports trickled in slowly of missing fishermen, collapsed schools, and families trapped by landslides in the hills. The Philippine government declared a state of calamity across multiple provinces, calling for international assistance. Typhoon Tino wasn't just another storm on the map. It was a national catastrophe, a reminder that in the Pacific, where warm seas meet a changing climate, the line between safety and disaster grows thinner every year.
Katabang namo diri oy. Hala ka da.
As the skies finally cleared over the central Philippines, the scale of destruction came into painful focus. But so did something else: resilience. In Tacloban, where debris still littered the streets, neighbors formed human chains to clear fallen trees and carry supplies. Church bells rang not in celebration, but as a signal, calling volunteers to organize food drives and rescue missions. In southern Leyte, teachers turned damaged classrooms into temporary shelters, writing lists of missing families on chalkboards. Children slept under desks that once held their lessons. By the third day, emergency aid began to flow more steadily. U.S. and Japanese humanitarian teams arrived with satellite communication gear, water filtration units, and medical supplies. The armed forces of the Philippines used helicopters to reach isolated islands, dropping rice and canned goods to stranded communities. Across Cebu and Samar, generators roared to life, providing brief bursts of light to evacuation centers where thousands huddled together through the long, humid nights. The storm had destroyed homes, but not hope. In Masin City, a group of fishermen who had lost their boats helped rebuild others' houses using driftwood and salvaged tin sheets. In Ormoc, a cafe owner opened her damaged shop to feed rescue workers free of charge. And in Samar, where coconut farms lay in ruin, farmers replanted the first seedlings just days after the storm passed. Everywhere there was grief, but also defiance. Typhoon Tino had tested the limits of endurance, yet the Filipino spirit held firm. They had seen the ocean rise, the sky turn black, and the wind tear the world apart. And still, they chose to rebuild. For them, survival wasn't just about enduring the storm. It was about standing back up together when the wind finally stopped.
Inuntik ko mo, evacuate kasi sa daan.
The rain may have stopped, but the story of Typhoon Tino doesn't end here. Because what happened in the Philippines this week is more than a local tragedy. It's a message to the entire world. A message written in shattered homes, flooded streets, and the silence left behind when the storm passes. Every year the Pacific grows warmer. Every year storms like this grow stronger, faster, more unpredictable. And while these events may seem far away on an island half a world from home, the truth is that they're part of the same pattern reshaping weather across our own coasts. From Florida's hurricanes to California's floods, we're all standing in the same storm system now. Yet even amid ruin, there's hope, the kind that comes from human resilience. The people of the Philippines didn't wait for the skies to clear before helping each other. They shared food, rebuilt homes, and stood shoulder to shoulder when everything else had fallen. That's the kind of courage the world needs more of. If this story moved you, if it made you stop for a moment and think about how fragile our planet has become, don't let it fade when the video ends. Like this video to help more people see what's happening. Share it with someone who still believes storms like this are just part of nature's cycle. Subscribe for more real stories from across the world, stories of survival resilience and the growing power of our changing climate. And before you go, we want to hear from you. Do you believe disasters like this are unstoppable acts of nature, or the result of how we've changed the planet? Because the storms are getting louder. And every voice, every choice will decide what the next one sounds like.